Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every person's journey when they finally see their own worth, step into their power, and refuse to be manipulated. If you've ever dealt with a narcissist, you know how deeply they crave control, validation, and the feeling of superiority. They feed off your insecurities, doubts, and need for approval. But the game changes the moment they realize you're not the same person they met. You've grown, you've healed, and more importantly, you've become too strong for their tricks. At the core of every narcissist is a deep, often hidden insecurity that drives them to constantly seek external validation. They need to feel important, admired, and in control to maintain the fragile image they've created of themselves. But rather than building genuine self-esteem through healthy relationships and personal growth, narcissists take a shortcut. They manipulate others to get their needs met. This need for control can show up in subtle ways at first. They may shower you with affection and praise, making you feel like you're the center of their world. It's called love bombing, a tactic used not because they love deeply, but because they need to hook you in. Once they feel confident they've won you over, their behavior often shifts. Suddenly, your boundaries are questioned, your opinions minimized, and your emotions invalidated. All of it serves one purpose: to keep you under their control. Validation is their lifeblood. When you compliment them, prioritize them, or even react to their drama, you feed their ego. Whether it's positive or negative attention, it doesn't matter as long as it revolves around them. The narcissist thrives in this dynamic because it confirms their belief that they are central, important, and powerful. But here's the catch: this need is never truly satisfied. A narcissist's self-worth is like a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it will never be enough. So they keep demanding more admiration, more attention, more control, often at the expense of your emotional well-being. They create cycles of idealization and devaluation. One day you're perfect in their eyes, and the next you're the problem. This constant shift keeps you off balance and desperate to get back in their good graces, reinforcing their power over you. It's not a coincidence, it's a strategy. Understanding this is the first step toward breaking free. Once you recognize that their need for control and validation is not about you, but about their own internal emptiness, you begin to take your power back. You stop playing their game, and that's when everything starts to change. A narcissist's entire strategy hinges on one critical thing: your compliance. Whether it's through emotional manipulation, guilt, charm, or intimidation, their ability to maintain power depends on your willingness, conscious or unconscious, to keep the cycle going. The moment you begin to show real strength, that cycle begins to break. And that shift is something they are neither prepared for nor equipped to handle. Personal strength doesn't always look dramatic. It can be quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in self-awareness. It starts with a change inside of you. Maybe you begin to trust your gut more. Maybe you stop explaining yourself so much. Maybe you realize that you don't have to tolerate the emotional chaos they bring. That's strength. And the moment you show it, the narcissist feels the ground beneath them start to crack. Why? Because your strength threatens their illusion of control. Narcissists build emotional empires where they are at the center, and everyone else plays a supporting role. But your strength sends a powerful message. You are no longer available to play small for their benefit. You start asserting boundaries, you stop reacting to their provocations, and you begin to prioritize your own mental and emotional health over their demands. This shift doesn't just confuse them, it scares them. Narcissists aren't drawn to strong, self-contained individuals unless they believe they can tear that strength down. So when you start standing in your truth and acting from a place of self-respect, it disrupts everything they've worked to establish in the relationship. Their tactics, which once worked flawlessly, begin to fall flat. The guilt trips no longer land. The gaslighting loses its effect. The manipulation starts to bounce off the armor you've built from experience and healing. And here's the most telling part: when you show strength, you force them to confront something they hate facing. The fact that they're not actually in control. The entire illusion they created starts to unravel, and their mask begins to slip. That's when their behavior often becomes more erratic, desperate, or aggressive. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because they're losing the grip they once had. This is what makes personal strength so powerful in these dynamics. It doesn't just protect you, it exposes them. It throws light on the tactics they've used and reveals the truth behind the charm, the manipulation, and the control. And once that truth is out in the open, there's no going back. When people think of strength, they often mold actions confronting someone face to face, shouting back, standing tall in the middle of conflict. But real lasting strength, especially when dealing with a narcissist, is often far more quiet, subtle, and internal. It's not about creating dramatic scenes. It's about choosing peace over chaos. It's about responding rather than reacting. And most importantly, it's about taking control of your own narrative. You see, narcissists thrive on reaction. They want you to explode, to plead, to break down, because every emotional outburst gives them a sense of power. It tells them they still have influence over your feelings, your mind, and your behavior. But when you stop reacting the way they expect, when your silence speaks louder than your words, it deeply unsettles them. That's when the dynamic begins to shift in your favor. Quiet strength looks like walking away from an argument instead of defending yourself endlessly against their accusations. It's choosing not to respond to a manipulative message. It's letting their insults hang in the air without flinching, because you no longer need to prove anything to them or to yourself. It's sitting in stillness while they scramble to push your buttons and realizing they no longer have access to your peace. It also shows up in the boundaries you hold. Not the kind you shout or post about online, but the ones you practice consistently, day after day. The boundary of not answering late-night calls. The boundary of not explaining yourself for the 100th time. The boundary of declining invitations to emotional chaos. These quiet acts of self-protection are powerful beyond measure because they come from a place of self-worth, something a narcissist can't manipulate or fake. This quiet strength is confusing to them. They're used to pulling the strings and watching people dance. But when you stop dancing, when your calm becomes unshakable, they lose their grip. They might try harder, push louder, even become more extreme, but it won't work, because your power is no longer external. It's not based on approval, validation, or keeping the peace. It's rooted in who you are. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is this: your silence, your refusal to play the game, your stillness in the face of their storm. That is what real strength looks like. And it's a language narcissists cannot understand. When a narcissist senses that they're losing control over you, whether emotionally, mentally, or energetically, they don't just walk away quietly. They pivot, they adapt, and they shift tactics in an attempt to regain the upper hand. This is one of the most telling signs that your strength is working. Because when the old methods stop producing the desired result, the narcissist enters a state of panic behind the scenes, even if they appear calm on the surface. At first, their response may be subtle. If guilt tripping you used to work, but suddenly you're no longer taking the bait, they may try flattery or fake vulnerability. They might start talking about how they're the victim, how hurt they are, how no one understands them, not even you. This is called reverse empathy manipulation. It's meant to make you question your strength, to feel like you're being cold or unfair for pulling away. The goal is to reel you back in, using sympathy instead of dominance. When that doesn't work, they may escalate. This is where you'll start to see more aggressive or passive-aggressive behavior. The once charming narcissist may suddenly become harsh, critical, or sarcastic. They might begin to insult you subtly or publicly, triangulate you with others, or engage in smear campaigns. They'll use phrases designed to hurt you, things they know cut deep, because they've studied your emotional patterns. But here's what's really happening. These are not the actions of someone who's in control. These are the desperate reactions of someone who's losing it. In many cases, a narcissist will cycle between hot and cold behavior, 1 minute love bombing you again, the next giving you the silent treatment. This pattern, often called intermittent reinforcement, is psychologically designed to confuse you. It creates a trauma bond where your brain gets stuck in a loop of trying to earn their affection again, just like before. But when you've stepped into your strength, you recognize this pattern for what it is, a trap. And instead of chasing their approval, you begin to feel indifferent to their swings. Another tactic they may use is to pretend nothing is wrong. They'll act overly friendly, calm, or even supportive, as if to gaslight you into thinking you imagined all the toxicity. This is what makes narcissistic manipulation so dangerous. It's not always loud or overt. Sometimes it comes wearing a smile, offering an apology, or wanting to talk things out. But the intention behind it remains the same, to regain control. They may even try to trigger nostalgia, reminding you of the good times, bringing up moments when things felt beautiful, safe, or romantic. This is emotional bait. They know that your mind holds on to the highlights, even when the full picture was toxic. But your strength, your growth, reminds you that those moments were often just part of the cycle. So when the narcissist shifts tactics, remember it's not because you're being cruel or cold. It's because your growth threatens the illusion they worked so hard to create. You're no longer falling into the emotional traps, and that's a kind of freedom they can't tolerate. Their toolbox may be full, but your resilience has changed the rules. One of the most threatening things to a narcissist isn't anger or confrontation, it's your evolution, your healing, your progress. The person you're becoming, the one who knows their worth, who thinks critically, who sets boundaries, who no longer responds to manipulation, is someone the narcissist doesn't know how to control, and that terrifies them. You see, narcissists are deeply invested in keeping you frozen in time. They want you to stay stuck in the version of yourself that they first manipulated, the version that was more trusting, unsure, self-blaming, eager to please, or emotionally dependent. That version of you made it easier for them to play puppet master, pulling strings and getting reactions. But growth disrupts that dynamic completely. When you start healing, you begin to see through their tactics. The comments that once made you question yourself no longer land the same way. You start to recognize gaslighting for what it is. You stop doubting your perception of reality, and with every realization, your emotional attachment to their approval begins to fade. You go from asking, "What did I do wrong?" to asking, "Why did I put up with that for so long?" And that shift in perspective changes everything. Narcissists are deeply uncomfortable around people who are self-aware. Why? Because self-awareness is a mirror, and they've spent most of their lives running from mirrors. Your growth becomes a reflection of everything they haven't addressed within themselves. Your confidence reminds them of their insecurity. Your emotional independence highlights their emotional dependence on others for validation. Your boundaries expose their overreach. And here's where things get really interesting. When a narcissist realizes they can no longer shape who you are, they often try to dismiss or mock your growth. They might say you've changed like it's a bad thing. They might call you cold, selfish, or too sensitive. They may accuse you of thinking you're better than them simply because you're making healthier choices. This isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because they feel left behind. In some cases, they'll even try to compete with your growth. Suddenly, they're quoting the same self-help terms you use, mimicking your language, pretending to grow alongside you. But it's often surface level. They're not interested in healing for the sake of becoming better. They're doing it to maintain proximity to you, to keep the connection alive just a little bit longer. The difference is, you've outgrown the illusion, and now you see the cracks clearly. The most painful part? Sometimes your growth will mean leaving them behind. Not because you hate them, but because your new self can't survive in the same toxic soil. And a narcissist knows this. That's why they resist your change, not because they don't see it, but because they do. And they know it's the beginning of the end for their control over you. Your healing journey, your transformation, your evolution, it's not just personal, it's powerful. And to a narcissist, it's threatening in the deepest way possible. It means they no longer have the ability to define your reality. At the heart of every narcissistic relationship is a hidden transaction. You give them emotional energy, and they take it without giving anything real in return. This energy isn't just love or affection, it's your attention, your reactions, your time, your worry, your anger, your sadness, your confusion. To a narcissist, all of it is fuel. It's called narcissistic supply, the emotional sustenance that feeds their ego and helps them maintain the illusion of control and superiority. The moment you cut off that supply, whether intentionally or naturally as part of your growth, it disrupts their entire ecosystem. Imagine pulling the plug on the very source of power they relied on to keep their identity inflated. That's what happens when you stop giving them your emotional responses. At first they may not notice the change, but slowly they'll realize that something feels off. You're not reacting the same way. You're not chasing after them during their silent treatments. You're not defending yourself against their false accusations. You're not rushing to reassure them when they pretend to be wounded or misunderstood. And that's when the panic sets in. For them, not for you. Narcissists depend on your emotional engagement to validate their own importance. It doesn't matter if the attention is negative or positive. If they can trigger you, it tells them they still matter, that they still have influence. But when you detach emotionally, when you become unbothered, neutral, and unmoved by their antics, they begin to feel invisible. And for a narcissist, invisibility is unbearable. You become unpredictable to them, and that's dangerous in their eyes. They no longer know what buttons to press. Their usual tactics, guilt, blame, flattery, rage, sulking, start to fall flat. Because now you've changed the rules. You no longer see them as the center of your emotional world. You've taken your energy back and started using it to build yourself instead of managing them. This emotional cutoff is powerful because it's not loud. It's not about blocking their number one day and then texting them the next. It's not about saying "I'm done" and then staying emotionally invested in what they say or think. It's about true disengagement. It's a deep internal shift where you genuinely no longer need their validation, no longer fear their disapproval, and no longer take responsibility for their emotional chaos. And when that happens, the narcissist starts to unravel. Without your emotional supply, they feel empty. Their carefully constructed image of superiority starts to crack. They may lash out, love bomb, or try to guilt you back in, but the supply is gone. You're no longer feeding the machine. And they know it. That realization hits them harder than any words ever could. It's the moment they realize they've lost access to your emotional world. And once that door is shut, it's not easily reopened. One of the narcissist's most dangerous talents is turning relationships into a psychological chessboard, where they always expect to be several moves ahead. They create chaos, confusion, and contradiction not by accident, but by design. They want you off balance. They want you second-guessing yourself. And most of all, they want you playing by their rules, where they control the narrative and rewrite reality whenever it suits them. But at a certain point, when your awareness sharpens, when your self-respect deepens, you realize that the entire game is rigged. You start seeing patterns in their behavior. You begin to notice how every conversation becomes a setup, how every compliment has a hidden agenda, and how every act of kindness is transactional. That's when the shift happens. That's when you stop playing. This is not about revenge or matching their toxicity. It's about stepping off the board entirely. You no longer try to prove yourself, defend your worth, or explain your emotions in circles. You recognize that engaging in their game is like fighting a battle where the rules constantly change and the goalposts always move. And the only way to win is not to participate. Your strength lies in neutrality. You become unmoved by their provocations. You stop engaging in pointless arguments designed only to exhaust you. You no longer chase after closure they'll never provide, or apologize for boundaries you're entitled to have. You learn to sit with the discomfort of silence instead of rushing to fix things they broke in the first place. And this disinterest in their game is what unnerves them the most. Because up until now they believed they had you trained, reactive, predictable, invested. But now you've unplugged from the drama. You don't flinch when they bait you. You don't engage when they go silent. You don't defend yourself when they start rewriting the past. You know the truth, and more importantly, you know it too. The narcissist thrives on control, but once you stop playing, they lose all leverage. Their strategies only work when you participate. The moment you remove your energy, your attention, and your emotional investment, the entire structure of manipulation begins to collapse. Because here's the truth, they never had real power. They only had the power you gave them while you were stuck trying to understand, fix, or love someone who was only playing a role. By stepping out of the game, you regain control not just over the relationship, but over yourself. Your clarity returns. Your emotional bandwidth expands. Your focus shifts from survival mode to growth, peace, and purpose. And while the narcissist may still try to pull you back in with old tricks, you now see those tricks for what they are, desperate plays in a game you've long since outgrown. There's a moment in every healing journey where you stop just surviving the experience and begin reclaiming your life. That moment doesn't always look dramatic. It might happen in silence, in solitude, in small but powerful realizations. But when it arrives, it changes everything. Because it means you've stepped into something the narcissist tried desperately to prevent: freedom, emotional, mental, and spiritual freedom. Freedom doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you're no longer emotionally chained to it. You're no longer consumed by what they think, how they'll react, or whether they approve. The spell is broken. The psychological fog starts to lift. The weight you carried for so long, trying to fix them, trying to make it work, trying to be enough, begins to fall away. And what replaces it is clarity, peace, power. This kind of freedom is subtle at first. It's in the moment you see their name pop up on your phone and feel nothing. It's in the moment you tell your story and don't feel shame. It's in the moment you choose silence instead of explaining yourself. It's not the absence of memories, it's the absence of control those memories once held over you. For a narcissist, this is the one thing they feared all along. Because freedom means you're no longer a participant in their illusion. You're no longer the mirror they used to reflect a version of themselves they wanted to believe in. You're no longer available for their cycles of praise and punishment, idealization and devaluation, chaos and calm. You've stepped out of their emotional labyrinth, and for the first time, you're walking in a direction that doesn't lead back to them. Freedom is choosing your peace over their approval. It's recognizing that you don't need closure from someone who benefits from your confusion. It's finally understanding that love does not require losing yourself, that boundaries are not selfish, that detaching is not cruelty, that walking away is not weakness, it's wisdom. And that wisdom reshapes your entire world. You begin to attract peace instead of drama, mutual respect instead of mind games, depth instead of performance. You start living in alignment with your values, your truth, your joy. The strength you once used to survive them now fuels the life you're building without them. Freedom isn't just leaving the narcissist behind, it's leaving behind the version of you that thought you had to stay. And so as the narcissist watches from the sidelines, they will come to realize what they never expected, that the moment you found your strength, your growth, and your peace, you became untouchable. You became someone who no longer needs their validation, their approval, or their manipulation to thrive. And that, my friends, is the moment that you win. Because true victory is not in defeating them. It's in walking away from the chaos they created and stepping into a life of clarity, self-respect, and emotional freedom. It's knowing that your worth was never tied to their opinions or their games. It's the freedom to finally be yourself, unapologetically and without compromise. So when the narcissist realizes that you're too strong for them to control, when they see that the emotional supply they once thrived on is gone, and when they realize they can no longer pull the strings, that is your victory. And with that victory comes something far more powerful than any fight could ever offer: the freedom to live authentically, to love fully, and to embrace the peace that you deserve.